Hello, everyone. My name is Min Su. I'm currently clinical fellow in Seoul National University Hospital, Department of Nuclear Medicine. And today, the subject I would like to discuss with you are the radiobiology. So actually, it might be a very not a like novel knowledges, but just some basic concepts. So it might be quite somewhat easy for seniors or nuclear medicine physicians. But I think it is because of the increasing interest in the diagnostics and radiation therapies, I think to understanding radiobiology is also important. And as I have announced last week, I would like to also have a discussion about what kind of subjects to be delivered next semester. So I would like you to participate in after this end of this lecture too. Okay, thank you, and I will start. So firstly, we can divide the radiation effect from the DNA level, cell level, and tissue level, and also in the general health. First, the radiation provides energy to substances along its pathway, and from it, the electron are ejected because of the given energy, and we call it a ionization. So the ionizing radiations are like alphas, X-rays, gamma, and and the process in which this radiation directly damages biomolecule is called a direct action. And since our body tissue are consisted of 2/3 of water, radiation can also cause a ionization of the water. And from the ionization of the water, the radical components can be created. And this can be it can have a chemical reactions to with the DNA and make a micromolecular damages. And this process is called a indirect action. And as you can presume that like the high linear energy transfer ionizing radiation such as alpha or neutrons will have more of a direct action. However, like X-rays and gamma rays, which have low linear energy transfer, will have a more proportion of such a indirect actions. And it is known that like in such a low linear energy transfer, the fraction of this indirect action is known to be like 2 to 3 times of the direct actions. So the indirect action happens very quickly as a physical reaction, and because of such a radiation and composition of these free radicals, it can actually induce a chemical reaction. So, so as you have seen from this indirect and direct effect, when radiation hits a cell and it may damage DNA inside the cell. But firstly, like such a damage can be repaired by inherent human body systems. So minor damages such as a single strand break or double strand break, which has a point which is far away, can be successfully repaired by the DNA repair enzymes. Because as you can see, there is a part which can be replicated. Like such a part has a counterpart which is preserved. So according to this paired part, this DNA can be well repaired. However, when many parts or a part very close have damage, it cannot be fully repaired. And because of this incomplete repair, cells can die. And and even when some cells die, they can be actually replaced by the other cells in the tissues. However, when there is a large number of cell death or degeneration, there is a possibility of deterministic effect. But the starting point of these events are from the damage of the DNA. So as I have told you, there is a tool after the damage, if it can be repaired, and if it is not repaired, it will go on for a death. And also, if there can be a possibility of partial or incomplete repair. So again, with a failure of repair, a large number of cells may go on for death or degeneration, and there is a possibility of causing fetal effects, referring to the deterministic effect. And in the cells which genes were not completely repaired and survive, genes and these may undergo mutation, and it can cause a stochastic effect, such as a cancer or hereditary effects. And it is known that a exposure to 1 milligray of X-ray causes a single strand break at one location per cell on average. And this amount of radiation is actually equivalent to 1 millisievert. And the double strand break occur less frequently at 0.04 location per cell, which means that if 100 cells are irradiated to 1 milligray of X-ray, double strand break actually occurs in 4 cells. And not only this direct or indirect effects, there are some other known effects in the DNA level. So first is about the adaptive response. And although it is from some in vitro cell level test, it is known to be although this high radiation can induce a higher response compared with the lower radiation, when there is a combination of this low radiation first, and then if this high radiation or any radiation comes next, the response, it is some in the cell level, it is shown that the response can be lower because of the adaptive response in the DNA level. And there is also some findings that such a genomic instability will not show on after the ionizing radiation. But because of epigenetic response, these kind of genomic instability may show up in the laterhood, which will cause some more damages. So these adaptive response and genome instability has somewhat controversial part. And next can be a bystander effect. So when there is a direct damage in the target cells, it can actually induce some cytokines or inflammatory factors, or it can have other, like for recent researches, exosomes can also come out. And it can have an effect on the bystander cells, which the cell which has not been directly eradicated, radiated. So, but however, some from the experiments, it has shown there are some different effects. It can be, some researchers have shown like detrimental effects, such as a sister chromatoid exchange or mutation or genetic instability and cell death. However, some also have shown like advantageous effects like cell growth stimulation and acquisition of resistance. So then what might be the, so I have prepared some questions along the lecture, so I think you can just easily select an answer if you. So what might be a graph explaining the bystander effect? Or is it possible to answer it, or sorry, I haven't tried to other students. I think there are like quite different answers. Okay, let's just wait for like 10 seconds because it doesn't need that much Okay, so the question was about what is the graph explaining the bystander effect. Actually, the answer should be two, because as I have told you in the previous slide, there is this bystander effect shown to have like detrimental effect and also a advantageous effect. So these kind of graph may have such a advantageous response, and you can think that like for adaptive response, the graph might show like this. So the risk can be lower than like in the linear model. However, for the genome instability, there can be like low dose can have higher risk because of such a epigenetic responses of the DNA. And so although there is no direct effect in the DNA. In the later stage, it can come out, so it can show a higher risk. So the genome instability might be referring to this kind of supralinear graph, and adaptive response can refer to such a, which might be similar to the hormesis graph. However, the bystander effect, we don't know, but it can be both too, like the supralinear and also hormetic graphs. So, and then the important thing comes is then how can we calculate or predict such a effect? And from here, the effect is referring to the cell death. And most widely used is the linear quadratic model for the cell survival. And it is one of the key tools in the radiation biology and physics. And it provides a simple relationship between cell survival and delivered dose. And there are, as you can see from the name, linear quadratic model, it has two components of linear part and the quadratic part. So as you can see, this alpha D refers to the linear part of the graph, and beta D square actually refers to the quadratic part of the model. So the curvature of so when the alpha is higher, and there is more chance of the graph to be a linear, but if the beta component is higher, the possibility of there is more possibility to show as like this kind of curvatures. And as you can assume that high LETs might have like such a linear, but before that, what I want to explain is what are these components? What is this alpha D and beta D square referring? Is that firstly, the alpha D is the probability. Actually, this is a probability of whether the double strand break will come. So it means from one hit, there is a double strand break and cell damage. So it refers to it is a linear. However, there is another type which can cause such a double strand break, which is a composition of two single strand break. And if such a single strand break happens very closely, it can have a similar effect as a double strand break, which was made by one hit. However, the possibility of such a single strand break happening very near should be like possibility is multiplied. So it is expressed as a square. So that's what it is composed of. And you can think that high LETs will have much more possibility to have such a single hit with a double strand break. So the alpha D component is higher for the high LET, so the curve, the survival dose and cell survival curve will show as a linear. However, for the low LETs, such a single hit, which makes a double strand break, is not that much, but single strand break will happen more. So there is a more components of beta D square. So it is more, there is more curvature compared to the high LETs. So again, this linear quadratic model has some assumings. So firstly, it assumes that DNA hit events from the damage of DNA are random and with probability proportional to the dose. So such a probability, if we need a 2 hits in single strand break, it will come out as a square. And there is another assume that for the cell sterilization, there needs a double strand break, like cell sterilization, meaning death or inability to reproduce. And as I explained, there are 2 methods of producing a double strand break. And these are 2 components, which is the single hit damage, which can induce a double strand break, which is the component of alpha D. And beta D square is a part where there is a 2 hits in close proximity, and which each breaking a single strand and producing a double strand break. And there is another part. Some mic is open, but okay. And there is another component in this graph, as you can see. It has been shown here. You can also see that the fractions of alpha D and beta D squared might be, you can imagine it might be important. And there is a dose where such a cell deaths of alpha D and beta D squares are same. And this point where the alpha D and beta D square is same is referred to as a alpha to beta ratio, and it is a dose. So it is this alpha beta ratio is a dose at where the alpha D and beta D square is the same, and it indicates how resilient a cell is to radiation damage. So before, I have one simple questions. So I think you might. So what might be the physical unit for the alpha to beta ratio? Okay, actually, it is conceptual, so it might be hard to, it can be hard to understand, but actually for communication, the ratio of alpha beta actually refers to the, as I mentioned, the dose. So it is, so the physical unit is actually gray. So as you can see here, so like for in this graph, the alpha beta will be 8 gray. And so, so high alpha beta ratio, like around like 10 for like tumors, are indicate that the single hit damage does not readily accumulate to lethal effect, and there is little increase in cell killing per unit. And low alpha beta ratio indicate that accumulation, like in the other like CNS or prostate, it indicates that accumulation of multiple single hit produces increased lethality for higher doses. So this actually gives a hint why we have to do a fractionation. And you can see from like if you do a fractionation, what happens for this late responding tissue and tumors, you can see the difference is that for the late responding tissues, if you give a dose like this amount and do the fraction, the graph will seemingly like show like this with a 4 fraction. However, like tumors, because it has a more steep in the earlier like lower dose, it may show a graph like this. So if you give more fractions, like for instance, if you are giving a dose at here, there will be a more chance of late responding tissue, which is a normal tissue, may have more radiation effect. However, when you give a fractionated dose, this normal late responding tissues can be preserved. So such a fractionation of the delivery of radiation is actually to reduce the most important part is to reduce the toxicity to the normal tissue. And this can be referred to and it can be seen through the biological effective dose. And such a biological, this BD represents a physical dose required for a given effect. And it is actually theoretically a theoretical dose in which, if delivered in infinite fraction with low dose, would produce a same biological endpoint. So how this formula was produced, you can see from this equation that when it is given in an infinite fraction with very low dose, which is close to 0, the proportion, because this beta d square, it is a square part. If this d goes like near like very low, this component can be discarded. So only the alpha d component will be left. So it is the BD is theoretically defined as a ratio of cell killed to the alpha. And as from this equation, so you can see this kind of equation is can be produced. And the purpose of such a BD is to actually predict a clinical outcomes when like treatment parameters such as fractions and number and dose per fractions are changed. And also, this is a biological effective dose, the physical unit of the BD is the gray. Okay, so there are some, you can try for a simple calculation of the dose fraction when used. This is an example. So like you want to calculate the dose fraction when using like dose per fraction when using 5 fractions for radiotherapy to have a same biological effect as a single fraction of 10 gray. So then you need to apply this biological effective dose to calculate how much dose per fraction you should give if you conduct a 5 fraction radiation therapy. So like for tumor, for the single fraction of 10 gray, the BD, if you calculate here, will come out as a 20 gray. And you now need to calculate what might be the dose if you deliver it as a 5 fraction. And so you can come out with 3.1 gray per fraction. And like you can also calculate at this like dose and fraction, like 3.1 gray and 5 fraction, you can calculate the BD for kidney. And to calculate the BD, what you should know is the, the alpha beta ratio of each tissues. So putting in the value of 3.1, what you can get the kidney BD is 31 gray. But what is interesting that you can see is that if you calculate the BD by assuming a single fraction of 10 gray, it comes out to be 42 gray. So this actually is an important part that suggests that the single dose of the 10 gray is like 1.5 times more toxic to the normal tissue, the normal kidney, than so it actually shows the importance of fractionation to reduce the toxicity in the normal tissues. And you can refer to that. Tissue with a low alpha beta ratio are more sensitive to the fractionations. Okay, and the next part is about the relative biological effectiveness. And this RBE is an empirical value, and that varies depending on the type of ionizing radiation. And the definition of this relative biological effectiveness is a ratio of dose of one type, which is a reference radiation, and mostly the 250 Cav X-ray or copper 60 gamma rays are used for the reference. And the relative to another, which is radiation of interest that causes the same amount of biological damage. So in the survival graph, you can see that the point. So the same amount of biological effect, you can draw a line in here. And the ratio between this dose and the dose of the interest is the RBE. So as you can imagine, as like for higher high LET, like alphas or neutrons, this RBE value will be higher. And for low LET, this RBE value will be lower. And later on, I will explain about the equivalent dose, but this relative biological effectiveness are actually is composed to use for the weighting factors of such a different type of ionizing radiations. Okay, and there are factors affecting this RBE. So not only the type of ionizing radiation, but there are like other factors which can affect the RBE. And so as you can see, there are like in the high oxygen circumstance, there is more possibility of higher radiation effect because with the free radical, which is produced after the radiation, and with the presence of the oxygen, it can make more like free radicals, which can make a chemical reaction. So in the high oxygen circumstance, there is higher radiation effects compared to the hypoxias. And also temperatures have an effect. And because in the lower temperature, this free radicals can be, the diffusion of these free radicals is reduced. So there is more chance of higher sensitivity to radiation in the higher temperature compared to the low temperature. And also cell cycles are affected, and the dose rates are also higher. Dose rate have a higher, more radiation effect. So it is known that the M phase is the most sensitive phase for the radiation, and compared to the S phase, and because resistance is as told is greatest in especially the latter part of the S phase, and it is due to it is explained by in this later part of the S phase, their repairs are more likely to occur because in here there is a replication of the DNA. And at the time of replication, there are more chance of repair of the DNA. So although radiation have a single strand break or some change in the DNA, it can be repaired easily. However, at the mitosis phase, it is most sensitive because such a DNA repairing enzyme cannot access to the damaged site due to in here there is a chromatin concentration. So these repairing enzymes cannot come closely. And again, as I told, the oxygen is an important factor for the biological effectiveness. And there is a term of oxygen enhancement ratio. And the definition of the ratio between a dose of radiation, the ratio of dose at hypoxic condition between the oxygen condition, which has a same biological effectiveness. So as you can refer that in the presence of the oxygen, it is more sensitive to the radiation. So every time the oxygen enhancement ratio is higher than 1 in all kinds of ionizing radiations. But actually, it differs from the type of the ionizing radiation. So I think one easy question can be what might be the relationship graph between the energy LET and the oxygen enhancement ratio. Okay, I think the answers are pretty similar. However, as you can see that you can imagine that in high LET, there will be actually because no difference between, although it is like hypoxic or oxygen condition, because this oxygen enhancement ratio is referring to the more refers to the indirect effect of like free radical production. And as I have told you earlier, the high LET like alpha and neutrons are actually have less proportion of such an indirect effect. So the change due to the oxygen presence of the oxygen is less effective in such a high LETs. So the graph will look like number 2 actually. So at the low, for the low LET ionizing radiations, the OER, the oxygen enhancement ratio is high, like more than 3. However, it gets lower as it goes to the high LETs. However, for number 1 graph, actually the number 1 is about the relationship between the RBE and the LET. So as the LET gets higher, the RBE gets higher. However, there is some point when it reduces, and it is because it is known because of there comes a overkill of the cells in this part of the graph. Okay, and so there are like strategies to enhance or reduce such a radiation effect. And mostly it is hard to actually control the part like direct action. However, it might be good. It might be easier to control the indirect part. And so radio protectors are actually have been produced for this part. So the problem of the indirect action is because the radiation makes a free radical. So if there are some materials that can decrease such a free radicals, it can be a good radio protectors, and it can actually reduce the indirect actions of the radiation. And the known mechanism of such a radio protectors should be removal of free radicals and damage recovery by hydrogen donation. And it can also have an interaction with cellular component and have a protective effect. And it also is known to induce a hypoxia in the tissue to have a radio protection. And such how much those can be reduced by the radio protector is shown as a number of dose reduction factor. And it is defined as a ratio of dose required to produce an effect in the presence of the radio protector to the dose required to achieve the same effect without the radio protector. And as you can see, assume that this DRF should be always higher than 1 to have a protective effect. And for now, the FDA approved radio protectors are amifostine and the polyfermine. And however, this DRF actually may not exceed 3. And there is a reason, because I have told you earlier that
they're like the portion of the indirect response is like 3 times to the direct response. So although we can reduce all the indirect responses, there are components of the direct response. So this dose reduction factor may not exceed 3, but it should be always higher than 1. And there are also materials which can enhance such a radiation effect, which is the radiosensitizers. And known sensitizers are halogenated pyrimidines and hypoxic cell sensitizers and chemotherapeutic agents. And how it works is that this halogenated pyrimidine is similar to normal DNA precursor, the thymidine, and it can replace the base of thymidine. And what it makes as when it replaces such a thymidine, it can actually weaken the DNA chain. So it can be effective for the radiation. And also there are hypoxic cell sensitizers, which is to increasing the radiosensitivity of cells and some known hypoxic cell sensitizers are nitronidazole or nizonidazole. And also there are like chemotherapeutic agents. So if you can stop the DNA repairs or the production of DNA replication, actually it can more induce a damage to the radiation. It can enhance the radiation damage. So as you will well known is about like for the PRRT, for the neuroendocrine tumor therapy, it induces a double strand breaks. And as you can see, a larger fractions are induced by single strand break, which requires a PARP1 activity for the repair of such a damage. However, if you give a PARP inhibitor, this repair mechanism will not work. And so such a combination with a PRRT will have a more effective therapy for the cancers. So there is a ongoing clinical trial using olaparib combination with the olaparib, which is the PARP1 inhibitor, with the Lutathera to see the efficacy when doing the combinations. And after there is a cell effect, we can move on to how this radiation have an effect in the tissues. And generally, it is known that actively dividing cells tend to show higher radiosensitivity, like for example, hematopoietic cells. Stem cells in bone marrow are differentiated into various blood cells, so it has a high sensitivity to radiation. However, also digestive tract, gastrointestinal system, the mucous cells are reproduced every time. So it is also very vulnerable to the radiation. On the other hand, like nervous system and muscle tissues, which no longer undergo cell division at the adult stage, are known to be resistant to the radiation. Okay, so after moving on to the radiation health effect, I think we can have some break for 10 minutes, and I think we can move on to the next part of radiation effect and the general health effect. And if you have any questions or comments in between the lecture, you can freely write down in the chat and we can discuss it later on. So, okay, let's have some rest for 10 minutes. Okay, I think we can restart. So when considering the health effects of radiation on human body, usually we separately consider the deterministic effect and stochastic effect. So the deterministic effect actually is do not appear unless having been exposed to radiation exceeding a certain level. And how you actually, it actually happens like if it exceeds some certain level of threshold, then it can morphological defect can be seen. However, before, although there are some parts which are dead or damaged cells, it can be like it can in morphologically it may have no change. So, but then how to define this threshold dose is actually when a number of people are exposed to the same dose of radiation, and if certain symptoms appear in 1% of the total people, then that dose, which makes a 1% of population to appear symptom, is considered to be a threshold dose. And the stochastic effects are effect whose like incidence cannot be completely denied even with low dose exposure, and they are managed on the safe side in general under the assumption that there is no threshold value. So the purpose of why we think separately is the protection proposed should be different. So for the deterministic effect, it is to we should have a we should prevent the occurrence of such a accidental situation. However, for the stochastic effect, the protection proposed will be to limit and to lower as low as possible for reduction of such a stochastic effect. And as you can see, this deterministic effects are specific to particular tissue rather than the individual. And for the deterministic effect, the severity of the harm is dose dependent. However, for the stochastic effects, the severity is not, it's actually independent of the dose. However, what is dependent is that the probability of the effect increases with the dose. Okay, then we'll have a brief question might be. So you can choose a stochastic effect. Yeah, so I think as many will rightly know that the hereditary effect is the stochastic effect. So Yeah, it can be divided like a deterministic effect with a threshold value. So most of the deterministic effects are categorized into acute disorders, such as like skin erythema, hair loss, or sterility. However, there can be also like late onset deterministic effects, such as a cataract or glaucoma. And there is a stochastic effect, which can be known to be hereditary effects or like leukemias or cancers. So it is radiation exposure at levels exceeding like 100 milligray from here at one time may cause effects on human body due to cell death, and organs with high sensitivity to the radiation are more likely to be affected with a small amount of radiation. Like from here, as you can see, as the like testis, which is very sensitive, and even like low dose radiation at 100 to 150 milligray temporarily can decrease the number of sperm, and it may cause a transient sterility. Bone marrow, which is also like hematopoietic cells, is also highly sensitive to radiation, and it can decrease even in low radiations like 1,000 milligray. However, like these symptoms actually naturally heal. However, on the other hand, like for the radiation exposure at levels which exceeds a 2,000 milligray, it may cause a like permanent decrease of the bone marrow functions. So normally, when we do radiation therapy, like iodine therapies or the neuroendocrine tumor PRRTs or PSMA therapies, like we give a safety margin for the bone marrow as a 2 gray. So like from the historically, there are some attempts to give maximal safety dose for the iodine therapy, and the strategy of the maximum safety dose is to give a maximum dose which will not exceed the bone marrow accumulate dose of 2 gray. So that kind of things are from such a experiments that this 2 gray will have a deterministic effect in the hematopoietic bone marrow cells. And for the stochastic effect, it is estimated that the relative increase, there is a relative risk of cancer increase by 1.8 times due to radiation exposure of like 10,000 to 2,000 millisievert. However, like for 100 millisievert, there is a like relative risk of 1.08, and below 100 millisievert, it is considered to be extremely difficult to detect the risk of developing cancer. So we, for our like radiation workers, we give a safety margin of effective dose to be 100 to be below 100 millisievert in 5 years, and for like in 1 year we need the limit for 50 millisievert, and it is like according to such a studies. But as you can see from the graph next here, the relative risk, actually there are many risk factors, risk for the cancers, and like such obese or heavy drinking and smokers actually have more risk, relative risk compared to such a radiation. And before, just for some understanding, to evaluate the stochastic effect, there are two values which is largely used in epidemiology work. And firstly, the relative risk represents how many times a certain factor increases the risk of an individual exposed. So it focuses more on an individual, which is to focus more on the individual to develop a disease. And however, like attributable risk, it represents how much a certain factor increases the incidence or mortality rate of a group. So it focuses on not the individual, but increase in the number of patients in a group. So it is quite a different, it shows a different meanings. And so using this kind of relative risk, we can see how those are relevant to the relative risk of cancers. And so this figure shows how cancer risk have increased depending on where in the body was exposed to how much dose of radiation. And so the horizontal axis indicates the absorbed dose to organs through a single high dose exposure from and it is the data from the atomic bomb survivors. And this vertical axis indicates the excess relative risk. And you can see that when the absorbed dose at 2 grade, the excess relative risk for the skin cancer is like 1.5 times compared with the non-exposed group. And from this study, it was shown that as the breast, the mammary gland like breast and skin and colon are tissues that are easily affected by the radiation and which may develop a cancer. And however, like liver and stomachs are relatively not an organ that will develop a cancer affected by the radiation. Also in age, not only the part of the tissue, age is also an important factor, and particularly children's, because children's have a high committed effective dose per unit activity. They are more actually sensitive to the radiation, especially the thyroids are the most sensitive, and they are more sensitive compared to adults. So you can see from the graph here that risk of like thyroid cancer, stomach cancer, and solid cancer as a whole are higher among people who are young at the time of radiation exposure. And however, like risk of lung cancers are high among people aged at like 40 or older. However, like for the breast cancer, it's higher during the puberty, like in the adolescent period. And for the colon cancer, actually do not show like such a significant difference among the ages. So they have very different relative risk according to the organs and also according to the age. So now, so we have seen the radiation effect on DNA, cells and tissues, and also what they have an effect in the health. So then we now need to know then how we should say or how we should describe this radiation. And the units of radiation are somewhat different according to where they are used. So firstly, the units of radiation can be broadly divided into the for like source of the radiation. And from here, we can use a Becker. However, there is another part which are receiving the radiation. And receiving side, the units for radiation can be gray for absorbed dose. And for the equivalent dose, or effective dose, we use a Siebert. And so we will see through what each components are meaning. So firstly, you will know about the Becker. It is a number of nuclei that decay per second. So it is a number of decay per second. And the absorbed dose is a energy deposit in the matter by ionizing radiation per unit mass. So just as you can see, the kidney, which has a 24 gray in the left side and 12 gray in the right side. So just a quick question will be, what might be the absorbed dose in kidneys? Okay, I think, okay. Okay, so the most answer was like 24, 12, 24, and there was also 36. So what is the absorbed dose in kidneys? So let's assume it was assumed that both kidneys have same volume and density, which means that both kidney have same mass. And however, this kidney, the left kidney, had a absorbed dose of 24 gray, and the right kidney had a absorbed dose of 12 gray. And actually, then as a definition, it is a radiation ionized energy per unit mass. So if someone asks what is the absorbed dose for both kidneys, actually it should be 18 gray, because it is a if you divide by the, so let's see if there is a pen. Okay, so this kidney has a 24, like just assume with a, oh, sorry. Okay. I'm not sure why. So this kidney has a 24 gray for 1 kilogram, and this kidney has 12 gray for 24 joule per 1 kilogram, and this kidney has 12 joule for 1 kilogram. Then if you add up, it is 2 kilogram per 36 joule. Then it may be 18 joule per kilogram. So the absorbed dose in the kidney actually should be 18 gray. So you might need to remember that the absorbed dose is a energy per unit mass, which is joule per kilogram. And traditionally, this 1 gray can be has been used as we use a unit of rod, and it was as 100 rod was 1 gray. And as you can see, this AD, you can easily remember that this means the absorbed dose. Okay, so there are some some concerns about using absorbed dose in the PR, like dosimetry for the any PRRT. Since when we do the PRRT, we do a repeated therapy. So what we can get is a cumulated absorbed dose first. So like you can imagine that if we give 24 gray for the first cycle and 24 gray for the next cycle, so the cumulated dose will be 48 gray for the kidney. However, as we have seen previously about the BED, biological effective dose, such a fractionation will have a different effect in for the tissues. So there are also attempts that we need to use a biological effective dose to actually calculate to predict the risk of the tissue toxicity. And so as from this study from Journal of Nuclear Medicine, they have shown that like the creatine clearance loss per year, which refers to the function of the Renner, which refers to the Renner function, were more related with the BED, but not with the accumulated absorbed dose. So that also should be think. And nextly, what we want to know is about the effective dose. And before going to the effective dose, we have to calculate the equivalent dose. So the equivalent dose is obtained by multiplying the absorbed dose of an individual tissue and by the radiation weighting factor. And so here in the equivalent dose, the radiation weighting factor is important. And as you can see in the graph, the number of this black dots can be referred to as a absorbed dose. And although the number of dots are same, so these two have same absorbed dose, but you can imagine that this will have a different biological effect. So this high LET will have more detrimental effect in this tissue compared to the low LET, which has like very homogeneous effect on the tissue. So it has been shown like different weighting factors should be applied for different ionizing radiations. So for like alpha particles, it is up to 20 times more than the X-rays or gamma rays. And these weighting factors are actually based on the RBE, which was discussed previously of radiation for the stochastic effect risk. And now we have the radiation weighting factor, but to sum up to calculate the effective dose, we need to have we need to calculate the radiation exposure on the whole body. Then what we need to do is we need another tissue weighted sum. As we have seen previously, like different tissues have different radiation sensitivities. and it has a different cancer risk. Like relative risk of cancer were different according to the tissue and also the age. So such a tissue weighted weighting factor was also considered. And this is some examples of the tissue weighted sum. And what it does is the purpose is to predict the stochastic health risk to the whole body. And the sum of this tissue weighting factor should be, as you can see, 1. And the unit of the effective dose is sievert. However, as a physical unit, it is same as the joule per kilogram. But still, because the definition is different, we use a different unit, like for the effective dose sievert and observed dose for the gray. And just for an example, to calculate the effective dose, the equivalent dose for individual tissues are multiplied by their respective tissue weighting factors. So when the whole body is evenly exposed to 1 milligray of gamma ray radiation, we can expect the effective dose to be 1 millisievert. Since this gamma ray, the radiation weighting is 1, so it should be 1 sievert of equivalent dose. And if we multiply each tissue weighting factor, it will come out as a 1 millisievert. However, when only the head is exposed to 1 milligray, we should think about the tissue weighting factor should be only applied to the tissue which were irradiated. So like tissues in the head, like thyroid, brain, and salivary like gland are entirely exposed to the radiation. So it can be calculated like this, and it will come out as like 0.07 millisievert. So although same absorbed dose for the irradiation, the effective dose, so the stochastic effect will be different for this two. Okay, so this is some result of the Olinda program after doing the lutetium 177 therapy, and the right side is the Olinda, the result of the after the gallium-68 PSMA study. So I have some brief question about. So what do you, for the left side of lutetium result, what do you think is the most important components among these three like doses? Okay, let's wait just for like 10 minutes, 10 seconds more. Okay, I think the answers were somewhat distracted, and actually there is no like the best answer. However, okay, then let's do, before discussing about it, let's start about, then what do you think is the important factor, the most important component in the gallium-68 result of Olinda? Okay, let's just have some 10 seconds. Okay, so also somewhat different answers were come out. Just actually, this is my opinion, but how we should think about. So here, what this result means is that here the 0.36, 0.37 is a total absorbed dose. So the unit for here should be 0.37 milligram per megabecquerel. And here the effective, since it is the effective dose, it should be like 0.0 millisievert per megabecquerel. But what I think is more important for the lutetium therapy is a result of absorbed dose. Since since we need to aware of a deterministic effect in the tissue, so we, like, as you have heard, that we make a threshold of like 23 gray for kidney or 2 gray for red marrow is about the absorbed dose, and to actually to not encounter a deterministic effect in such organs. And in the therapeutic agent, such not meeting such a deterministic effect is actually more important than reducing a effective dose. Actually, it is a therapy for a cancer patient. So like need to consideration about secondary malignancy might be not that much is relatively not, might be not important than a single organ toxicity. So to find out, so that's why I think the absorbed dose in the critical organs like kidneys and red marrows might be more important than the result of effective dose. However, in the diagnostic agent, since the dose is low, there is like very low chance of a deterministic effect to come up to each organ. So actually, the more important aspect might be the effective dose. So it may show, like if we repeat this gallium-68 PSMA PET-CT, the effective dose might increase, and it is actually relevant to the risk of cancer. However, although we repeat like 10 times, actually it is relevant to make a deterministic effect in the organ. So that's why I think it is more important to seek for the effective dose for the diagnostic agent. However, for the therapeutic agent, we need to more focus on the result of the observed dose. Okay, so that was the question. And however, like as you have these observed, like these effective dose are from the phantom data, and it is a protection quantities. And so it is like based on the organ on radiation weighting factor. So it is not, it cannot be actually measured directly with the instrument. But it is actually the purpose of such effective dose is to show a risk, a stochastic effect, but it cannot be actually measured. So we need some unit or some component that we can measure, and it is known to be the operational quantities. So these protection quantities we cannot directly measure, but these operational quantities are which we can measure. And it is constituted by the ambient dose, which is used to monitor the environment, and also like personal dose equivalent are also used to monitor the person. And like what you will be most familiar will be this TLD badge is actually the measuring the personal dose equivalent. And from this personal dose equivalent, we can actually measure the risk of the stochastic risk of the cancers. Okay, and then so what we use to show the operational quantities, we usually use for the personal dose equivalent like HP10. And this 10 means a 10 millimeter, which is 1 centimeter. And so what it measures is a dose at the depth of 1 centimeter. And why we measure the dose at 1 centimeter is because the dose at the 1 centimeter is actually the highest dose in the human body. And we assume that this value is regarded as the dose exposed to all the tissue, although it will be lower than the ones at the point of 1 centimeter. But the purpose is to now at least underestimate the radiation exposure. So that's why it is measuring the 1 centimeter depth. And always it should be like in the standard position. This TLD badge should be in the standard position. Okay, next, some points I also want to discuss is about the radiation in the real practice and how to like calculate just one. I would like to share one examples of it. Okay, I'm not sure why this does not. Oh, I think it's quite late. Okay, I think it, sorry. So you may be very familiar with the release, how the release, those constraint, the regulation for the patient release after iodine 131 therapy. And this is like from the NRF, and our Korea also uses the same. So at the patient discharge, patient can be released if the activity of the patient is lower than 33 millicurie, and if the dose rate at 1 meter is below 0.07 millisievert per hour, then the patient can be released to the patient can go home. And this came from that the dose constraint to caregivers to be lower than 5 millisievert. So theoretically, it is to give people next to you should have a dose from you to be lower than 5 millisievert for infinite time. Then how can we calculate this? Is we can calculate the area under curve of the iodine 131. So this graph can be shown as a dose at T is a will be a dose at the initial time point, and it will follow such a exponential curve. So, and if we do the to calculate the area under the curve, we need to apply the integral as for the infinity. And then it will show up like Z0, which is the constant, and there will be a 1 minus E. Like this kind of will come out. And as you will know, this coefficient will be defined as, we can know from the half-life of the iodine 131. So like we can use a T half-life, like physical half-life or effective half-life can be used. So when applying this, what we can get is a formula like this. So it is to calculate the accumulated exposure at time T. And so if you calculate the T to infinite, you can imagine this will go as a 0. This part will go as a 0. So only this part will be left. And however, there should be one more assumption about the occupancy factor. This occupancy factor is how the proportion like how long the caregiver or your friend are with you in at least within 1 meter. So like if your parents are with you for in a 1 meter distance for 6 hours, then the occupancy factor will be 0.25. So a quarter will be the occupancy factor. So you can, when you multiply this, then what you can see is that, so this dose, this calculated dose should be 5 millisievert. So if you calculate it from, you can get a value of 32.7 millicurie, which is approximately 33 millicurie here. So this is some theoretical base how the patient relief criteria has been made. And also it is easier if you know the dose rate. Actually, when you see a graph like the time and dose rate as a vertical axis, the activity, the area under the curve actually directly shows the dose, microsievert or dose. So you can like area under the curve and the occupancy factor of the quarter, then you can easily measure the release constraint, dose rate constraint for the patient for the release, which is like here 71. If you calculate, it comes out like 71.9 microsievert per hour. So if you change it to millisievert, it is near 0.7 millisievert per hour. So these are some practicals, how we use this dose constraint. However, there are some concerns about this formulas, and since it is too much conservative, as you can see here, what they use for the half-life is the physical half-life, not the effective half-life. So there is no consideration of any kind of like biological half-life of the iodine-131. So there are some other, for the individual application of such a dose prediction or for dose rate prediction, there is need to actually apply biological half-life. So there is attempt to using this as not the physical but the effective half-life instead for evaluating the individuals. But for the group, it might be more general to use the most conservative data, which is the physical half-life. Okay, then, and another might be the last is that actually I think there is already the answers. So so for the occupancy factor, how you can calculate it, you can easily think like for the patient if the patient sits, if the patient will spend 8 hours working at 1 meter from the same colleague, then the occupancy factor will be like this because he worked 8 hours per 24 hours a day. So it is 0.33 will be the occupancy factor. However, when you think like in the first case, it is more complex, and you can think like for 6 hours, if the patient spends 6 hours per 1 meter and 8 hours sleeping at the 0.1 meter distance with the partner, then this part will have an occupancy factor of 0.25. However, this part will have an occupancy factor of near 30, more than 30. So then the occupancy factor will be like 33.55, which is very high. So what I want to show is that distance actually can be very important. So when giving a caution to the patients when they go to home, the more importantly, I think, is to recommend them to be more further away from their children or their partners. And lastly, there are some, as we review the radiobiology and the radiation. However, the most of the ideas came from the radiation oncology, the EBRT, not from the PRRTs or like what we use, the theranostics. But there is some significant difference between the EBRT and theranostics. As you know, the EBRT uses the low LET and it has a tumor, and it only should concern about radiation sensitivity and microenvironment. However, like theranostics, we use different particles like alpha, beta, and OJ particles can be used for the therapy. And for the tumor, we not only for the radiation sensitivity and the microenvironment, but we also need to consider about like antigen density or the size of the tumors. And the distribution of EBRT is relatively very homogeneous along the tumor tissues. However, for us, it is because of the antigen densities, the distribution is heterogeneous. And they give a multiple fractions of the therapy with a dose rate of 60 to 120 gray per hour. However, we give very low dose rate of like 0.1 to 1 gray per hour. It's a protracted exposure. So there is need to have more experiments about, or more data should be combined to understand the real radiobiology for our theranostics. So I think this is the end of my lecture for today. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions or comments, please freely give me any. Okay. If you don't have any more comments or questions, I'd just like to have some discussion about the next semesters of what to do. So just for some questions about it might be great if you can answer to some surveys. So I will start some surveys. So just I'd like to know about the current circumstance about what kind of imagings or what kind of studies or therapies you are currently doing, and what kind of studies you might be more interested in. Okay, I think we can have some like time, like 20 seconds or. Okay, I think there are many centers using PET imaging, and also there are like half and half centers which can produce radiopharmaceuticals using the cyclotrons. And I think still mostly the FDGs are used for the evaluations, and like it also is interesting that more centers are using PSMA. Okay, I think we can stop for now for this one. And just other might be the current status of the therapy. And you can choose like multiple answers if you do multiple therapies. Right. As expected, there is the most commonly done therapies might be the iodine 131 thyroid therapy. But it seems also there are like many who are doing PRRT or PSMAs. But it's also interesting that quite a lot of like 36% of the centers are doing dosimetry for in practice. So, okay, you can refer to that. And just for the last, for the current status, maybe, and again, thank you very much for the participation in the survey. Okay, I think like very half and half, like doing in vitro testings and not. Okay, so I'd like to spend just like 5 minutes more to ask you about some interest. And actually you can choose like multiple answers. And please give us some, at least two for the so we'd like to incorporate your interest, and I think we can use this to configure the next semester lecture series, maybe. And if you have some, if it will be very great if you can also tell me about what kind of other interests you have, like you can give me by the chat or by just speaking through the mic. It might be very helpful for us to understand. I think there is one others. So if you can give us some what can be done, what you were interested in. Okay, so like there is one others, I think. And so if you have other interests, if you can give us by the chat, it might be very helpful. Okay. And Okay, just for, I have actually 3 more questions, so thank you again. So it's about what kind of subject might be interesting for specifically, like if we discuss about diagnostics, what might be the Thank you very much for the participation. And I think there are most of the people are interested for the therapeutic radiopharmaceuticals are like very related to the chemistry. Okay, thank you very much. And I think, so there were some interest also in the correlative imaging. So it's about what kind of like cancers you actually encounter the most and like, or what you are in interest. So actually we have discussed about hepatic malignancy and lymphoma this semester, and like lung cancer, breast cancer, and GI malignancy and prostate cancer in the last semester. So thank you very much for the part. Okay. Yeah. Oh, actually, I think there are 2 more questions. Sorry for. And for the general nuclear medicine procedures, like it's about like nuclear cardiology or neurologies, which also. So upon these answers, I think we can constitute, make some workshop. I think we will have a winter workshop, and also the first 2022 first semester we can configure according to your interest. Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, if we consider about a thyroid management, what might be your most interest for the thyroid management? And if others, you can also give me some examples of what kind of other. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I really appreciate everyone's participation, and I'd also like to we would also like to improve our this series. So we actually have constructed a like education course which has a lecture series or in the like first and second semesters, and also in the vacation period we have conducted a workshops for summer and winter. So I think I would like to thank everyone for the participation, and from the result of this survey, we would I think we can configure some more informative contents. And if you have other like things for other comments for us, I think you can, if you have, please really give us that, and it will be very thankful. Or like how to improve like motivations can be also. Okay, thank you very much for the participation. And I think next week will be the last lecture series for this semester. So I think you might enjoy the lecture from Professor Jae-sung Lee. Thank you very much today, and let's meet next week. Thank you.